time and a place to take risks. Like when you're younger, you can take risks. If we understand the risks properly, so like in this case here, starting a business, what happens if your business goes out of business? Well, for now, yeah. But I mean, the consequences are far more severe if you have a family and your business goes out of business. And so you'll find that people who have families tend to not start their own businesses. We tend to start them before there's a family. And then once it's in place and things are kind of more stable, then people have a family that, you know, will fall from there. Okay. All right. So now you start thinking about now consequences, responsibilities, and how those things tie into freedoms. In other words, why it is that this thing here, that freedom he's saying, kind of frightens us from this responsibility. Yeah.
When someone is free, they are conscious their decisions are made by no one more but themselves. So fear of freedom means fear of owning their actions.
Yeah. But I guess the question is, why does that frighten us to own our own actions?
Because when it's someone else's mess, we get to see the consequences. We get to witness what to do and not to do. It's easier to learn that way than when we experience it and it becomes harder.
Yeah. I think I was thinking, last period I used an example. Let's say that you're standing out here on Highland and you see an old woman trying to cross the street. She's going very slowly. So you're worried about her. So you run out there, you get hold of her and you kind of stop traffic and you help her cross. And she gets through the street pretty quickly. You get her on the street, you get her back in the corner and she just says, "Thank you so much. I wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for you." And you're like, yeah. You know, self-congratulate, you pat yourself on the back. And then just as you're doing that, there's a person riding up the sidewalk on a bike. He's not paying attention, he's looking the other way, and he runs into this woman and kills her. Yeah. So I guess the question is, are you responsible for what just happened?
No.
She just told you she wouldn't have been where she was if it wasn't for you. You acknowledged it, you can pat yourself on the back and make yourself feel pretty good, like that's right. Even though it wasn't you, you would probably feel some level of like, oh my God, if I just hadn't helped her. You know, now of course if you're being rational about it, you can realize, yeah, and maybe if you left her in the street, she'd have been hit by a car, or maybe if you had helped her in a different, you know, move somewhere different, and there's a whole infinite set of permutations of how that could have played out in real life. It just happened to be the one where she got hit by a guy on a bike. Now another way of thinking about it is, let's say that we're standing on Highland, same everything, you see a woman trying to cross the street, and I say to you, hey, go help her. And you're like, oh, okay. So you run out there, you help her, you get her on the corner, she says, oh my goodness, thank you so much. If you hadn't helped me, I wouldn't be where I am. And you're like, oh, it wasn't me, it was Scanlon's idea. And I'm over there going like, yeah, you know, good person. And then that guy comes up the sidewalk, runs her over on the bike and kills her. Now at least you have an ability to turn and go, Scanlon, that was you. That was your idea. If you hadn't told me to help her, then she wouldn't have died. In other words, now you get to be free of the responsibility of what just happened to this person. But understand that in both of those cases now, you're free of the responsibility. In other words, what I'm saying is that, let's say that I tell you to help her, you help her cross the street, and now that bicyclist never comes up the street. Instead, she's like, thank you so much. And you're like, oh, it wasn't me, it was Scanlon's idea. And she's like, oh, well, thank you very much. Now you don't get the congratulations either. So you don't get the downside if something goes wrong, but you also don't get the upside if something goes well. You know? And there's consequences, of course, for everything that you do. And there's consequences, by the way, for everything that you don't do. Let's say that you're standing on the sidewalk, you see the woman crossing, and you're like, I feel like I should help. I don't know, man. And then just as you're thinking that, a car comes by and slams into her. Oh my God, I should have done something. I saw the need and I didn't do anything. You know? We're responsible for everything that we do and everything that we don't do. Or we're responsible for nothing that we do. And we're responsible for nothing that we don't do. It's always somebody else's responsibility. well, it was her own fault for crossing the street, probably. Maybe it was also her children's fault for not being there for their mom, you know, in her advanced age. Maybe it's the city's fault for not having a crosswalk there. Maybe we can diffuse this responsibility to the point that now nothing is our fault, but that's the downside. Now nothing is your fault. Nothing is your responsibility. But that's also the upside. Then nothing's my responsibility. But then that means that you can never get the positive things from this, but you can also never get the negative things. Meaning that your life is just going to be kind of like this. No accolades, you know, nothing bad being blamed for, but then again, also nothing good getting credit for. And so you're just kind of like existing in life, and everything that happens in society is somebody else's responsibility, or somebody else's fault. Now, I think that we make a mistake so often when we think of responsibility as being a bad thing, as being a terrible thing. Maybe we should think more about it in terms of our intentions behind it. When you helped that woman across the street, you didn't intend for her to get hit by a car, and by a cyclist. But then again, you also weren't negligent. It wasn't like you positioned her in such a way that you knew that bicyclists were coming down the road. It was something you tried to do something positive, and yet something negative came from it. And so maybe there's something there about responsibility, and also the intentions behind the responsibility. Because otherwise, this and this get really convoluted. Because how can you possibly know that there are positive consequences from something that you say or do? I guess I'll try to make it more real. Somebody comes in here, and your friend comes in and asks you, does this dress make me look fat? Yeah. And you say, quite honestly, no, it's not the dress. Right? Yeah, it's not the dress that makes you look fat. You know?
It's the mirror.
It's the mirror, it's the reality of the situation. Or maybe you're like, oh no, that dress makes you look great. And then the person goes off and they feel all confident, and then they ask their crush out and the crush just laughs at them. And now they're completely destroyed. Now you might say, yeah, I lied to you, but my intentions were positive. And so often we hold people responsible for this, for what actually comes out of it. But again, so often in life, you can't tell what's going to come from things. You might intend to do a good thing. You might intend to do a right thing. But what actually comes from it could be very, very bad. Because there's so many moving parts in the world. There are so many bicyclists riding down the street. There are so many dresses. There are so many cheeseburgers. There are all kinds of things in life that can throw off your best intentions and bring about very negative consequences. You know, maybe you're trying to do something nice for somebody and say something nice to somebody, and in so doing, you piss off your boyfriend or your girlfriend. And it's like, I was just trying to be nice. Well, you got some significant consequences to deal with now. But I was just trying to, you're responsible for what you said. You know, we're so goddamn set on holding people responsible for the things that they say and do, and ignoring the intentions behind it. And we want all of the grace in the world when the consequences that for what we've done are negative. I was trying to do the right thing, but when somebody else is doing it, we want to just drop the hammer on them. Well, it's too, you know, you caused this to come about. Or I will say things like, and one of them, I hear this all the time, people say, well, it's your own fault for doing it. Dude, really? Like someone has a bad day, and they try to do something, and you really feel the need to slam them in the head with a hammer and tell them, well, it's your own fault for doing it. You're responsible for your choices. We are all responsible for every single one of our choices. And think about how many choices in the course of a day you make. What do you think it is? 100? 1,000? 10,000? How many choices in a day do you make, and how many of them actually turn out bad? Once in a while, that's going to happen. Well, it's your own fault. We expect people to be perfect, and the standard that we have for how a person should behave would be very different. But we should, maybe if we keep this kind of a thing in mind, we won't be so afraid of getting involved with things. Because you'll find that happening all the time. Like, I don't want to get involved because I don't know how it's going to turn out. So then we just, who do we let get involved then? People who don't really have an interest one way or the other, except just to give advice. So the fear of freedom is exactly that. It's the fear of having to assume responsibility. But the cool thing is that that's part of being free. It's part of being free. I was talking first period, I think it was, second period, I guess it was, about this distinction between whether we're looking for a freedom from responsibility or a freedom of responsibility. And I think that how you view that is going to have a lot to do with how you approach the world. In other words, are you looking for a freedom from responsibility, or are you looking for the freedom of responsibility? Because when you assume responsibility for your own actions, again, we don't need to frame it and to think of it as a bad thing. It means that you're taking control of your own life. And if you make 10,000 decisions, then you're going to make some bad ones. If you make 0 decisions, you'll make no bad ones, of course, except maybe the bad decision of not making any decisions. But certainly you're going to make some bad decisions. And the more control you take over your own life, the more control you have over it, but the more mistakes you're going to make. You have to be gracious with yourself and understanding of yourself. You have to accept yourself. But a big part of that, though, the danger of doing that, though, is that now you have to accept other people, too. Because once you sit there and realize, like, yeah, I make a bunch of decisions and some of them turn out bad, I bet you do too. And 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 I bet you do too. We all make these kind of things. So maybe assessing people and their intentions and being graceful towards them and understanding that people screw up and that people don't set out in the morning to be bad people. You know, we become bad people. I don't know if we necessarily become bad people so much as we do bad things, and the bad things are only bad because of this consequence of it all. So maybe assume some responsibility, be gracious about the intentions and the consequences, and we'll be more willing to exercise this freedom, perhaps. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Friday. It is.